The ultimate goal of the carbon tax and the cap and trade is to destroy production.
This energy tax is the largest tax increase in American history.
We're actually creating a global warming police. So number one, they can come in, the federal government can come in and inspect your house and send you the bill. We're setting up a global warming Gestapo
cap and trade scheme, which will not only increase taxes on every American, but will also transfer our national sovereignty and rights to a tyrannical world government, all in the name of saving the earth.
Is the legislation that we are discussing here today, is that something that you are going to personally benefit from?
If you believe that the reason I have been working on this issue for 30 years is because of greed, you don't know me. I've been willing to put my money where my mouth is. Do you think there's something wrong with being active in business in this country?
I am simply asking for clarification.
I'm proud of it.
The relationship.
I'm proud of it.
My name is Dr. Tim Ball. I'm a climatologist. I have a PhD in climatology from the Queen Mary College, the University of London, England. And I've been studying climate both with my 9 years in the Canadian Air Force, where it was essential to flying, and then after that at the university. So it's essentially been the whole theme of my career. Initially we're called climate skeptics. I said, but all scientists are skeptics. If you're not a skeptic, you're not a scientist. My whole career has been anything but a climate change denier. I've spent my career trying to educate people to how much climate changes naturally. So I'm anything but a denier, but of course that is part of the politics. And of course it's also part of what's called ad hominem, that if you can't defeat the person's argument rationally, you start attacking the person. And we see that with these terms, and we see it with Al Gore calling them flat earthers.
Congressman, you began by denying that there is a consensus on the science. There is a consensus on the science.
Well, you must have been listening to our testimony that we've had for the last few days with dozens of experts that have come in who have given completely different views.
Well,
I would encourage you to go back and look at the testimony this committee's heard.
There are people who still believe that the moon landing was staged on a movie lot in Arizona.
And neither of us are one of those. And I know you like giving those cute anecdotes. This is not a cutesy issue. We're talking about something that can export millions of jobs out of our economy, out of our country.
Richard Lindzen, the MIT professor of atmospheric physics, said it many years ago when he said the consensus was reached before the research had even begun. And then scientists like myself that stood up and said, hold on a minute, I got problems with it. Oh, paid by the oil companies. Don't trust that guy.
What the international scientific community is saying is correct. There is no legitimate basis for denying it.
Now, you hear the consensus argument. Well, the majority of scientists. What they're always talking about is, and originally the IPCC was about 3,600 scientists, it's now down to 2,500. That's the people they're talking about. But when you look at it, most of them are bureaucrats. They're not scientists at all. And very, very few of them are actual climate experts. If CO2 is not causing the climate change, what is? What are the major driving factors? And so they're essentially the ones that are left out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's unbelievable to me that they can come out and ignore the sun. I mean, everybody knows the sun goes in, it gets cool. You notice that, right? You have an eclipse, the temperature drops, and the birds start to get excited and so on. And when you look at the seasonal changes with the sun, how you can suggest that the sun is not a factor is really quite remarkable.
Giving us false scientific information is not going to clean up our environment. Speaking with a lot of promises and innuendo is not going to help clean up our environment.
Theories. They simply asserted them, and if you were a professor who stood up to them, then the Gestapo would come and take you away. We are perilously close to such a situation right now. Any academic, any other figure standing up to say the global warming theory of Al Gore is a piece of crackpot nonsense is in danger. You'd be fired from a government job, and in many universities, your job would be in danger. The idea that carbon is a pollutant is essentially a way of saying that humanity is a disease or a cancer that ought to be wiped out. Genocide. People have argued in this environmental coterie around Obama, around Holdren, the theoretician of de-development, who is now the science advisor of the White House, really the anti-science advisor. They've argued that babies are carbon monsters, carbon machines, and that every time you breathe out carbon dioxide, you're part of the pollution of the planet. This is an absolutely anti-human doctrine.
They use the environmental movement to promote their real agenda, which is globalization and federalization and power.
The globalists have co-opted the environmental movement. There are a lot of real environmental problems we face, like genetic engineering, where they're splicing plants, animals, insects, you name it. Toxic waste dumping in the ocean. No one wants to breathe bad air or drink toxic water. But the global carbon tax has nothing to do with that. It's a tax literally on breathing. Go out on the street or talk to your friends, your neighbors. Ask them, hey, should we ban dihydrogen monoxide? It's bad for the environment. The average person will sign your petition calling for the banning of water. That's right. Dihydrogen monoxide is water. It's the same thing with table salt, sodium chloride. And that's exactly what the establishment is doing with carbon dioxide. Ooh, dioxide. It has this scary sounding name. But the truth is, it's one of the 4 elements of life on this planet. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And if the establishment can tax and list as a toxic waste one of those basic 4 building blocks of life, carbon dioxide, they can regulate and control every facet of our lives and shut down any businesses that aren't part of their New World Order. When it came time for the 1,200-plus page greenhouse gas emission and carbon legislation to be voted on, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, would not let the Republicans, or even members of her own party, see the bill until minutes before the vote. Republican Minority Leader John Boehner engaged in a rare House filibuster and read shocking section after shocking section from the legislation.
Now, I really hate to do this, but when you file a 300-page amendment at 3:09 a.m., the American people have a right to know what's in this bill and have a right to know what we're voting on.
It quickly became clear why Pelosi and the Democratic leadership were desperate to keep the contents of the bill secret before the vote.
Now, because of this underlying bill, the federal government will virtually have control over every aspect of lives for the American people. It is time to stand up and say, we get to choose. We choose liberty or we choose tyranny. It's one of the two. The underlying bill represents the tyranny and the intervention of the federal government. It's our choice. What will we choose today? Will we choose liberty or will we choose tyranny?
And I know that we'll be facing the single moms that heard from last summer. They can't afford the gasoline bill. They can't afford the propane. You didn't do a great thing. You hurt some really decent families struggling, trying to make it, and this is going to be their death knell. It breaks my heart. I yield back.
It is, of course, a carbon tax on economic activity, farming, manufacturing, real production here inside the United States. It would tend to shut down even those miserable remains of an industrial economy that we still have after the collapse of the Detroit automakers and their related subcontractors and so forth.
Every home and business in the United States would be federally regulated and controlled. Mandatory home inspections will be carried out by federal inspectors, and it's all at the expense of the homeowner.
In New York, they're called the environmental police.
On this day, a surprise visit to a market in Brooklyn's Chinatown.
And every day you're not in compliance, you face huge fines.
Go to page 235. The Secretary may set and collect reasonable inspection fees to cover the cost of inspections required. So number one, they can come in, the federal government can come in and inspect your house and send you the bill. And if they find that you're out of compliance with this new federal code, the Secretary shall assess a civil penalty for violations of this section. And then further, going to page 236, each day of unlawful occupancy shall be considered a separate violation. We're setting up a global warming Gestapo that can literally come in, and now this new term, unlawful occupancy. So now living in your home is considered unlawful under this bill. This is ludicrous.
Worst of all, carbon czars in more than 35 federal agencies are given unlimited dictatorial power to tax all forms of carbon and carbon emissions. The Commissar Green Police openly brag that they will have the power to selectively enforce the new edicts on a case-by-case basis. With this new power, the Green Mafia can take over the entire economy through selective enforcement.
We know, Madam Speaker, that this national energy tax will cost the American people $2 trillion. We know that. We know this will result in a loss of 2.5 million jobs every year for the American people. We know that. We know this will result in a reduced standard of living for Americans. We know that. What is the point and what's the benefit?
Children are being indoctrinated inside the public schools nationwide to spy on their parents.
You can give information without having to give your name. You guys can get paid for good tips up to $200.
The New York Times praised public school programs in the United States and England that are training children to report their parents for eco-crimes, like taking a hot bath or letting the water run while you brush your teeth. All of that violates their carbon footprint credit allotment.
Check it out, check it out. And that's where we come in. We're the carbon cops and we're on the lookout for energy wasters.
Our job is to get all Australian households to cut their carbon emissions. So Carbon Cops is a program that looked at energy use in a domestic sense. We went into people's houses and got them to reduce their energy use by 50%.
Sadly, the Boy Scouts of America have now contracted with the Department of Homeland Security and are now training more than 20,000 Boy Scouts in anti-terror, urban warfare mount training. The federal grants are very specific. The Scouts are trained to carry out seek and destroy missions against disgruntled veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces.
I think the New World Order is emerging.
This is a hoax and a scam which is designed to transfer wealth and power from the private sector to the government sector and from the government of the United States to a world government.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
conspiracy theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right. Now they're right.
Is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of their country. One of the greatest events in history is taking place before our very eyes. For many generations into the future, our progeny will look back on this time as either a place where humanity rose to the challenge and made a stand against the forces of darkness, or as a time when the planet fell into the grip of a merciless high-tech tyranny.